The Bible does not describe one fate for hostile spiritual beings. It describes at least three, and it describes them as happening at the same time. Some are free. They move through the world, they speak, they enter and leave, and they negotiate about where they will be sent next. Some are already imprisoned. They are described as held, kept, and bound, and the language used is the language of a sentence already carried out. And some are bound at a specific location, waiting for a release that has already been scheduled to the hour. 3 conditions. 3 different descriptions, in 3 different parts of Scripture, none of which cancels the others. And here is the part that should stop every serious reader. The Bible never explains why one group walks and another waits in chains. It reports the difference and moves on. This film will lay out all 3 categories in the words the texts actually use, then put 4 explanations of the difference on trial and cross-examine each one. If you want the parts of Scripture that nobody explains properly, follow this page now, because that is the entire purpose of the next 20 minutes. Start with the ones who are free, because they are the easiest to establish and the hardest to explain. In the Gospels, unclean spirits are not in prison. They are in people, in synagogues, in a graveyard, in a house. They speak. They recognize who is standing in front of them. They ask questions. And in one of the most revealing scenes in the New Testament, they negotiate. A man living among the tombs is confronted, and the spirits inside him beg not to be commanded to depart into the abyss. That request assumes several things at once. It assumes the abyss exists. It assumes they are not currently in it. It assumes they can be sent there. And it assumes that whether they go is a decision that belongs to someone else. Read carefully. That single sentence establishes the whole problem of this film. There is a place of confinement. There are beings not in it. Those beings know about it, fear it, and can be put there at any moment. Their freedom is not their own possession. It is a condition they are currently allowed to be in. Elsewhere, the same picture holds. Spirits are described as going out, passing through waterless places, seeking rest, and returning. They are described as being cast out and going elsewhere. They afflict, they resist, and they are commanded. Nothing in the Gospel accounts suggests these beings are escapees or fugitives. They are simply not confined, and the texts never treat that as surprising. Now the second category, and this is where the language changes completely. There is a passage in the first letter of Peter in which Christ is described as having gone and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, who formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared. That sentence has been argued about for nearly 2,000 years, and the argument is not settled. There are at least 3 serious readings, and each deserves to be stated properly. The first says the spirits in prison are the disobedient beings of the pre-flood transgression, and the proclamation is an announcement of victory rather than an offer of salvation. This reading takes the word spirits in the sense it usually carries when it stands alone. The second says the spirits are the human dead of that generation, the people who ignored the warning while the ark was being built, and that the proclamation concerns them. The third says the preaching happened through Noah himself in his own lifetime, by the Spirit, to a generation that was alive then and is imprisoned now. Competent readers hold each of these. The passage is genuinely difficult, and any film that tells you it is obvious is not reading it, it is reciting a preference. But whichever reading is correct, one thing in that sentence is not in dispute. There is a prison, and there are spirits in it, and their confinement is tied to the period before the flood. The second letter of Peter is far more direct. It says that God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until judgment. The Greek verb used there is built on the name Tartarus, a term from the surrounding culture for the deepest place of confinement. It appears in the New Testament exactly once, in that verse, and what precisely it designates is debated. The letter of Jude gives an almost identical statement. Angels who did not stay within their own position of authority but left their proper dwelling are being kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Both letters agree on 4 points. The beings sinned. The sin involved leaving an assigned position. They are currently held. And the holding is not the sentence itself, but custody until a sentence. The vocabulary in those 2 letters repays attention, because it is the vocabulary of a jail rather than of a punishment. The word translated kept is a word for guarding, watching over, holding something in reserve. It is used in ordinary Greek for keeping a thing safe until it is needed and for detaining a person until a hearing. It is not a word for destruction. The phrase rendered gloomy darkness uses a term for deep murk, the thick blackness of a place where light does not reach. It carries no idea of fire, torment, or active suffering. What it describes is confinement in the dark. And the chains are chains. Both letters use ordinary words for physical restraint, applied to beings that are not physical in any way the texts explain. Put those three together and the picture is remarkably restrained. There is no description of torture, no flames, no screaming, no demonic hierarchy, no throne room. The New Testament says these beings are guarded, in the dark, restrained, and awaiting a hearing. Everything else that populates the popular imagination on this subject came from somewhere other than these verses. That restraint is itself evidence about what the authors were claiming. They were not writing a tour of a spiritual underworld. They were making a legal statement. The accused are in custody and the trial has not happened yet. That brings the third category, and it is the strangest of all. In Revelation, a voice instructs that 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates be released. And then the text does something no other confinement passage does. It says they had been prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year. Read that again. Not prepared for a purpose. Prepared for a time. The scheduling is stated at 4 levels of precision, and every one of them is fixed before the release happens. That is a completely different kind of custody from the previous category. The beings in chains of gloomy darkness are held until judgment, with no interval specified. These 4 are held at a named geographical location for an appointment already written into a calendar that nobody in the passage can read. 2 cautions belong here immediately, and both matter. First, the passage does not say these 4 are the same beings described in the letters of Peter and Jude. They are bound, and those are bound, and that is the entire overlap. Nothing in the text connects the 2 groups, and treating them as one is a reader's construction. Second, and this needs saying because it comes up constantly, the same chapter describes a mounted force numbering twice 10,000 times 10,000, which is 200 million. That number is not identified with any nation, ancient or modern. Interpreters disagree over whether the army is literal, symbolic, or supernatural, and the text does not settle it. Anyone attaching a modern country's name to that verse is adding something Scripture did not write, and this page will not do it. It is worth stopping on the river, because the location is not incidental and most retellings skip past it. The Euphrates is not a random waterway. It appears on the 2nd page of Scripture, named as one of the rivers going out of Eden. It reappears in the promise to Abraham as the far boundary of the land, the eastern limit of everything that was pledged. It is the river of the empires that carried Israel away, and the city that sat on it became the Bible's permanent symbol for organized human defiance. From the garden to the exile to the visions at the end, that one river keeps marking the edge of something. So when a passage says 4 beings are bound at that river, it is placing them at a border that the rest of Scripture has been using as a border since its opening chapters. Whether the author intends a geographical statement or a symbolic one is exactly the question, and honest readers land on both sides. Some hold that the vision uses a real place because the audience knew the frontier it represented. Others hold that the location is as literal as the 4 beings are. What the text does not do is give a spot. It names a river more than 2,000 kilometers long and says nothing about where along it. Anyone who tells you they know the coordinates has left the passage behind. There is one more feature of that verse that is easy to read past. The 4 are described as having been bound and then, in the same breath, as having been prepared. Custody and preparation at the same time. They are not simply stored, they are held in a state of readiness for something that has been scheduled. That combination does not appear anywhere else in Scripture's descriptions of confinement, and it makes this third category genuinely distinct rather than a variation on the second. There is also a place that keeps appearing across all 3 categories, and it deserves its own examination. The abyss. Free spirits beg not to be sent into it. In Revelation, a shaft to it is opened and smoke rises as from a great furnace. It has a ruler, named in both Hebrew and Greek, whose name means destruction. And in a later chapter an angel comes down holding a key to it and a great chain, seizes the dragon, throws him into it, shuts it, and seals it over him. That last detail matters more than it first appears. The abyss is described as something that can be locked, sealed, opened, and used again. It is not a metaphor for annihilation. It is presented as functional custody with an operator and a key. So Scripture uses at least 3 distinct terms across these passages. A prison, chains of gloomy darkness, described with a word borrowed from Greek mythology's deepest pit, and a sealed abyss with a shaft, a key, and a king. Whether those are 3 names for one place or 3 different places is never stated. The texts simply use them, in different books, for different situations. If you are following the argument this far, put a number in the comments before you hear the 4 explanations. 1. If you think all the confined beings are in the same place. 2. If you think they are in different places. I want to know where the gallery stands before the cases are made. So why the difference? Why are some free while others are held? Here is the first case at full strength. The difference is the offense. On this reading, the beings held in chains committed a specific and categorically distinct transgression. Both letters describe it the same way. They did not keep their own position. They left their proper dwelling. That is not ordinary rebellion. It is the abandonment of an assigned station, and both letters place it in the context of the generation before the flood, alongside the ark and the world that was destroyed. The free spirits, on this reading, never did that. Whatever they are, they did not commit the crossing that produced the pre-flood catastrophe, and so they were never subject to the custody that followed it. The difference in condition follows from a difference in what was done. The strength of this case is that it is built entirely from the text's own stated reasons. Neither letter says the angels were bound arbitrarily. Both give a cause, and both give the same cause. Now the cross-examination. If the offense explains the custody, we would expect the free spirits to be identified as a different category with a different history, and the Gospels never do that. They call them unclean spirits and demons and treat their existence as requiring no explanation at all. The case explains the imprisoned group well and the free group not at all. It answers half the question and leaves the other half untouched. The second case says the difference is timing. On this reading there is no permanent division into bound and free. There is a schedule. Some beings are already in custody, some are being held for a stated appointment, and some have not yet been taken. Revelation supports the shape of this reading, because the dragon is bound at a specific point in the narrative and not before it, and the 4 at the river are released at a specific point and not before that either. Confinement in these texts is repeatedly presented as an event with a moment attached. The strength here is that it takes the 4 levels of precision seriously. If custody were simply a state, the hour, the day, the month, and the year would be unnecessary detail. The text supplies them because timing is the point. The cross-examination is that the schedule is never laid out. We are told that individual events have appointed moments. We are never told the sequence, the criteria, or the interval between them. The reading correctly identifies that time matters and then has to invent the timetable it needs, and inventing timetables from Revelation has a long and embarrassing history that this page will not join. The third case says the difference is not one population with 2 fates. It says there are 2 different populations entirely. On this reading, the beings in chains are one kind of being, and the spirits moving freely through the Gospels are another kind altogether, with a different origin. That would explain the silence perfectly. The letters give an origin story for the imprisoned because there is one to give. The Gospels give no origin story for the free because they belong to a category the New Testament simply inherits without comment. The most developed ancient version of this idea comes from the Book of Enoch, and it must be labeled honestly. That book is not Scripture. It was written long after Moses. It belongs to a body of Jewish literature from the centuries before the New Testament, and it is quoted once in the letter of Jude, which makes it a witness to what ancient readers believed rather than a source of doctrine. In that book, the spirits that came out of the bodies of the destroyed giants remain on the earth as evil spirits, afflicting the living, while the fathers who transgressed are bound. 2 populations. 2 fates. One bound and one loose, by origin rather than by verdict. The strength of this case is that it explains the whole pattern with a single move, and it explains why nobody in the Gospels ever asks where the unclean spirits came from. In a world where that answer was widely assumed, no explanation would be needed. Now the cross-examination, and it is severe. The Bible does not say this. Not in Genesis, not in the Gospels, not in the letters. The entire mechanism comes from outside the canon, and the one New Testament author who quotes that book quotes a completely different passage of it, about judgment, not about the origin of demons. Using it to fill a biblical silence is importing an answer and then treating the silence as if it had been solved. This film will name the tradition, credit it, and refuse to promote it to Scripture. The fourth case is the one almost nobody makes out loud, and it deserves a seat. There is no system. On this reading, the pattern this film has been describing is an artifact of reading. A letter written to scattered congregations, a second letter warning about false teachers, a short letter by a different author, and an apocalyptic vision full of symbolic architecture were written by different people, to different audiences, for different reasons, using different vocabulary. Nowhere does any biblical writer set out to classify hostile spiritual beings. The map with 3 prisons on it was drawn by readers, later, by placing passages side by side that were never side by side. The strength of this case is intellectual honesty about genre. The Bible contains no chapter on the taxonomy of hostile spirits, and the absence is not an oversight to be repaired. Building one and presenting it as biblical teaching is exactly the kind of construction this page exists to resist. The cross-examination is that it may be too careful. The wording in the second letter of Peter and the letter of Jude is close enough that the two clearly share a common tradition, which means at least those two are describing the same thing. The abyss appears in a gospel and in Revelation with consistent features in both: a place of confinement, feared by spirits, that can be opened and shut. Total fragmentation understates the overlap that genuinely exists. So 4 cases stand, and none of them collapses. Now look at how much all 4 agree on, because it is far more than the dispute. All 4 agree that confinement is real and is described as a present condition, not a future threat. All 4 agree that it is imposed. In every passage, someone else holds the key, gives the command, opens the shaft, or issues the release. Not one confined being in Scripture is described as having placed itself there or as being able to leave on its own authority. All 4 agree that it is custody rather than a final sentence. The words are consistent across every text: kept until judgment, held until the judgment of the great day, prepared for an appointed hour. Every description points forward to something that has not happened yet. And all 4 agree on the implication that the free spirits themselves state. Freedom, in these texts, is permitted rather than possessed. The beings in the tombs beg not to be sent into the abyss because they know their condition can be changed by a word from someone standing in front of them. That is the actual content of this doctrine, and it survives every one of the 4 readings intact. Before the verdict, 3 restraints, because this material attracts invention more than almost any other. No modern nation, army, government, or ethnic group appears in any of these passages. The 200 million of Revelation 9 is not identified with any country, and the 4 bound at the river are not a coded reference to a contemporary event. Reading current headlines into apocalyptic numbers has been done in every generation for centuries, and it has been wrong in every generation for centuries. No date can be calculated from the hour, the day, the month, and the year. That phrase says the moment is appointed. It does not say the moment is discoverable, and it gives no unit, no starting point, and no reference. It is a statement about God's scheduling, not a puzzle for the reader to solve. And the Book of Enoch stays labeled. Written long after Moses, quoted once in the New Testament, valuable as evidence of what ancient readers believed, and not Scripture. Every time this film used it, it said so. Here is the verdict, by category. On the existence of 3 distinct described conditions, the evidence is decisive. Free spirits, spirits already held, and beings bound for an appointed release are all present in plain language. On the nature of the confinement, the evidence is decisive. It is imposed by external authority, and it is custody pending judgment rather than judgment itself. On the stated cause for the imprisoned group, the evidence is decisive as far as it goes. 2 letters give the same reason in nearly the same words: they abandoned an assigned position. On why the other group is free, the evidence is genuinely insufficient. The offense case explains the bound and not the free. The timing case identifies that scheduling matters and cannot supply the schedule. The 2 populations case explains everything and rests on a book the New Testament does not treat as Scripture. The no system case is the most careful and may concede more than the overlap justifies. And on whether the prison, the chains of gloomy darkness, and the sealed abyss are one place or 3, the evidence is insufficient. 3 vocabularies, 3 contexts, no verse connecting them. There is enough here to keep all 4 cases alive, and never enough to close the question. I do not know why some are bound and others walk. Anyone who tells you the answer is obvious has decided in advance which evidence counts, and usually which extra book to promote. If this is the kind of treatment you want more of, the kind that names its own weak points, send it to the person you argue about the Bible with. That is how this page grows. And there is one more thing in these texts that almost nobody stops on. The dragon is seized, thrown into the abyss, shut in, and sealed over. The custody is total and the sealing is deliberate. And then the same sentence says that after the 1,000 years he must be released for a little while. Must. Not may. Not might. The release is stated as a necessity, written into the plan by the same authority that ordered the binding. Why would anyone seal something and then be required to open it again? That is the next file. So before you go, answer the question these passages refuse to answer. Why are some bound and others still walking free? Put your number in the comments, 1 through 4, and tell me which case you would defend. I read them.